The calendar hung crooked on Janet's bedroom wall, its corners curling like tired eyelids. It stared silently, smugly, counting down. One date had been circled in red so thick it looked wounded, the ink pressed hard as if her hand had tried to punch straight through the paper. Tomorrow. Janet stood staring at it, her stomach folding in on itself like badly packed luggage. The room smelled faintly of washing powder and pencil shavings, ordinary smells that had no right to exist on the eve of something so dreadful. Her heartbeat drummed in her ears, a panicked percussion, and she felt suddenly too warm, too aware of her own skin. It was not an exam. It was not an operation. It was much worse. It was the dance. The dance had been invented, created was too generous a word, by Miss Brimshaw, whose bun was always tight enough to suggest it caused her constant pain and whose smile never reached her eyes. Officially, it was called a celebration of social grace. Unofficially, it was widely regarded as a mass humiliation exercise, a spectacle designed to embarrass as many children as possible in the shortest amount of time. Janet was 13 years old and already understood that adults could be dangerous when armed with good intentions. For weeks, the girls at Janet's all girls school had been practicing the waltz in the echoing gymnasium. At first, it had been ridiculous and joyful. They had twirled and tripped, bumped into one another, collapsed into giggles. Dancing then had been light, like laughter given legs. Music bounced off the walls, and mistakes were shared, harmless things. But somewhere along the way, quietly, cruelly, that changed. Tomorrow the boys from the nearby all-boys school would arrive. Tomorrow the practice would become performance. Tomorrow the room would be divided like a battlefield, girls on one side, boys on the other, staring across polished wood like opposing armies waiting for a signal to charge. And the worst part? The part that made Janet's throat tighten every time she thought about it was the choosing. Rather than assigning partners in advance, sparing everyone the agony, Miss Brimshaw had insisted on tradition. The boys would walk across the hall and ask a girl to dance. The girls, apparently, would wait. The girls had protested. They had argued. They had said it wasn't fair, that it wasn't modern, that they should be allowed to choose too. Miss Brimshaw had listened with her head tilted slightly, the way one listens to rain tapping on glass. And then she had said the rules of decorum were immovable. Now, standing in her bedroom, Janet felt the future pressing in on her chest. The image had rooted itself deep in her mind and replayed over and over like a broken film reel. Standing still, hands clenched, watching as girls around her were chosen one by one until only she remained. The thought made her feel small, as if the walls were inching closer. That fear may not have taken hold so fiercely if it weren't for the boy. Every morning for months on the walk to school, Janet had passed him. He was unlike the other boys who shoved and shouted and travelled in noisy packs. This boy walked calmly, as if the world did not need conquering, and every morning, without fail, he looked straight at her and smiled. At first she had been confused. Surely he was smiling at someone else. But there was no one else, just her. As days turned into weeks, the smile became a quiet anchor in her day, A fleeting moment gone as soon as it came, but bright enough to warm her all the same. On the rare mornings he wasn't there, the day felt dimmer, colder, like the sun had forgotten its job. When Janet thought of him, she thought of light, of ease, of happiness that seemed to spill out of him without effort. Now, as night pressed its dark palm against her window, she imagined watching him cross the hall, not toward her, but toward someone else. Her eyes burned, her cheeks flushed. The thought hurt in a way she didn't yet have words for. How would she survive if it really happened? Sleep came in fragments. When morning arrived, it swept her fatigue away on a wave of chatter and nervous laughter as she and her friends were shepherded toward the venue. The air buzzed, thick with perfume, panic, and anticipation. Excitement collided with dread. Bravery stood shoulder to shoulder with fear. The hall loomed ahead, vast and shining, its polished floor gleaming like a trap. The girls lined up as instructed, smoothing skirts, clasping hands, breathing too fast. Silence fell, heavy and expectant. Then the doors opened. The boys spilled into the hall as if pushed, stumbling slightly, eyes wide. Janet watched them enter one by one until she saw him. Her heart stumbled. He looked nothing like the boy she knew. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed, his smile gone. He looked as frightened as she felt. Miss Brimshaw's voice cracked through the air, sharp as a whip. Silence was demanded. Then, with the air of a general sending troops to their doom, she announced that the dance would begin and instructed the boys to invite a young lady to join them. Everyone waited. It was expected that nothing would happen, that fear would glue the boys to the floor. Teachers had prepared for this, plans layered atop plans, but none were needed. The moment Miss Brimshaw finished speaking, there was movement. Sudden, hurried, shocking. Janet watched as the boy she knew surged forward like a sprinter from the blocks. Realizing too late how it looked, he tried to slow, but his body betrayed him. Halfway across the hall, trapped in no man's land, he moved in a strange half-run, half-walk that drew laughter and jeers. Janet's heart cracked. She wanted to shout, to run, to do something, but her feet were frozen, her body disobedient. He kept coming. She glanced at the girls beside her and wondered what invisible magic made them more worthy. Any second now, one of them would be chosen. She lowered her head. Then pain bloomed at her side as an elbow jabbed her ribs. Startled, she looked up to see the girl next to her mouthing urgently, "Go on!" Janet looked ahead. He was there, staring at her. His body rocked as if the ground itself were unsteady. He held out a trembling hand. Rules had long since abandoned him. "Arthur," he said, his voice breaking, "please dance with me." A push sent Janet stumbling forward, her hand closing around his wrist. Cheers erupted, a roaring wave of sound. Arm in arm they walked to the centre of the room. Electricity sparked between them, a living thing lifting them, lightening them. They took their hold. This was different from all the weeks of practice. This mattered. Janet whispered, "Thank you for making me your first choice." Arthur smiled, glorious and familiar. You weren't my first choice. The words stung like frost. Anger flared, sharp and sudden. Janet opened her mouth, but Arthur hurried on. You weren't my first choice, he said softly. You were my only choice. If you had danced with someone else, I wouldn't have danced at all. Something inside Janet settled. The music continued, and the world for two young people finally moved in time.